Mark Consuelos was determined that day to tell Meghan Markle the truth with latent warmth. The confrontation that followed forced the former royal to flee the studio in humiliation. The Live with Kelly and Mark studio gleamed under its signature bright lighting as crew members made final adjustments for what was scheduled to be another entertaining morning television segment. The iconic set, with its warm colors and welcoming atmosphere, had been the backdrop for countless celebrity interviews over the years. Today, however, would add a chapter to that history that no one in the building could have anticipated. Mark Consuelos sat at the familiar desk he had inherited from Ryan Seacrest, reviewing his notes with the focused attention that had served him well throughout his transition from soap opera heartthrob to morning television host. As the husband of Kelly Ripa and a veteran of the entertainment industry, he had developed keen instincts for recognizing when someone was attempting to manipulate a narrative for personal gain. Kelly Ripa occupied her usual position beside him, her effervescent personality providing the perfect complement to Mark's more grounded approach. But even Kelly could sense that today's interview might venture beyond the usual promotional boundaries. The booking had been contentious from the start, with Meghan's team making unusual demands about interview parameters and certain topics being declared completely off-limits. The morning show format typically thrived on light-hearted banter and feel-good stories, but both hosts had noticed an increasing trend of celebrities using their platform to push carefully crafted narratives that didn't always align with observable reality. Today felt like it might be one of those occasions where their responsibility as broadcasters would conflict with their guests' desire for unchallenged sympathy. At precisely 9:15 a.m., a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the ABC studios on the Upper West Side. Meghan Markle emerged wearing an elegant powder blue blazer over a white silk blouse, her appearance carefully calculated to project both sophistication and maternal warmth. Her smile was confident as she waved to the small crowd of morning show fans who had gathered outside, but those who looked closely might have noticed a slight tension in her shoulders that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with her decision to appear on a show known for its unpredictable chemistry. Her entourage was notably smaller than in previous American television appearances, consisting of just one publicist and a single security officer. This reduction in support staff suggested either growing confidence in her media skills or budget constraints that her team preferred not to acknowledge publicly. Either way, it would prove to be a significant miscalculation. The green room provided a temporary sanctuary from the cheerful chaos of morning television production. Meghan sat in a comfortable chair, sipping coffee from an ABC-branded mug while her publicist reviewed talking points on a tablet. They had spent considerable time preparing for this appearance, knowing that morning television audiences were generally sympathetic but that the hosts themselves had reputations for asking unexpectedly pointed questions when their instincts were triggered. 5 minutes to air, a production assistant announced, and Meghan felt that familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that accompanied live television. She had specifically chosen Live with Kelly and Mark because she believed the format would be friendlier than hard news programs, and she was confident that her charm and media training would carry her through any challenging moments. Her phone buzzed with an encouraging text from Harry, reminding her to stay focused on their message of healing and truth-telling. The message brought a smile to her face, reinforcing her belief that this interview would follow the same pattern as her recent successful American appearances: sympathetic questions, respectful treatment, and another opportunity to reinforce her carefully crafted narrative. The walk from the green room to the studio felt routine, almost comfortable. The hallways of the ABC building carried the efficient energy of network television, and the staff members she encountered offered the kind of professional warmth that had made American media so much more appealing than its British counterpart. This comfort would soon prove to be dangerously misleading. Kelly Ripa stood to greet her first, her embrace warm and genuine. "Meghan, thank you so much for being here. We're absolutely thrilled to have you." "Thank you for having me, Kelly," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that carefully modulated tone she had perfected, confident but not arrogant, warm but not overly familiar. "It's wonderful to be here with both of you." Mark Consuelos offered his own greeting, his handshake firm and his smile welcoming, though something in his eyes suggested a level of assessment that went beyond mere politeness. "Really looking forward to our conversation, Meghan." The pre-interview small talk continued for several minutes, discussions about the beautiful morning, the studio's recent updates, and how lovely it was to see her again. But beneath the surface pleasantries, professional instincts were already at work. Mark had noticed something in Meghan's demeanor that struck him as performative rather than genuine, a quality of calculated vulnerability that immediately activated his protective instincts for his audience. 30 seconds to live, the floor director announced, and everyone took their positions. Meghan settled into the guest chair with practiced confidence, crossing her legs and placing her hands in her lap in that distinctly poised manner she had cultivated. Her latest children's book sat prominently on the coffee table between them, positioned at the perfect angle to catch the studio lights. The red recording lights blinked on, and suddenly they were broadcasting live to millions of homes across America. "Good morning, and welcome back to Live with Kelly and Mark," Kelly began with her characteristic enthusiasm and warmth. "We are so excited to be joined by Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, who's here to talk about her beautiful new children's book and her ongoing charitable work." "Meghan, welcome." "Good morning, Kelly." "Good morning, Mark." "Thank you so much for having me," Meghan replied, her smile bright and camera-ready. "It's wonderful to be here sharing this important message with your amazing audience." Kelly leaned forward with genuine interest. "This book is absolutely gorgeous, and the message about children finding their voices is so powerful. What inspired you to write this particular story?" It was exactly the kind of warm, supportive opening she had hoped for, and Meghan launched into a well-rehearsed response about empowering young people and the importance of authentic self-expression. Her answers were polished and emotionally engaging, hitting all the right notes about childhood development and positive messaging. Mark listened intently, occasionally nodding and asking gentle follow-up questions that seemed designed to give her more opportunities to share her perspective. For the first 12 minutes, everything proceeded within the comfortable parameters of morning television promotion. But then Mark's tone shifted in a way that was subtle yet unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. His posture straightened slightly, and his questions took on a more probing quality that suggested he was moving beyond simple promotion into actual journalism. "Meghan," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that somehow made his next words more impactful, "you talk a lot in this book about the importance of being authentic and speaking your truth. That must be something that resonates deeply with your own experiences over the past few years." The slight shift in his approach activated Meghan's internal warning systems, though she maintained her composed exterior. "Absolutely, Mark. I think authenticity is something we all struggle with, especially when we're in the public eye." Mark leaned forward slightly, his expression remaining friendly but his eyes taking on a more focused intensity. "That's interesting that you mentioned struggling with authenticity, because I have to say, a lot of people have noticed that your story seems to have evolved significantly over time. How do you reconcile that with the message of authentic truth-telling?" The question landed with surgical precision, and Meghan's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment before her media training kicked in. "I think people grow and evolve in their understanding of their experiences, Mark. Sometimes it takes time and perspective to fully grasp what you've been through." Kelly glanced between them, sensing that Mark was taking the interview in a direction that hadn't been discussed in their pre-show planning. But she trusted his instincts and remained quiet, allowing him to pursue his line of questioning. "But that's what I'm trying to understand," Mark continued, his voice maintaining its warm tone while his questions grew more pointed. "We're not talking about growth or evolution, we're talking about fundamental contradictions. For example, when you first joined the royal family, you gave interviews talking about how grateful and excited you were. Now you're telling a completely different story. Which version should people believe?" Meghan's hands, which had been resting casually in her lap, began to fidget with her wedding ring, a tell that experienced television professionals learned to recognize as a sign of increasing stress. "I think both can be true, Mark. You can be grateful for opportunities while also recognizing that situations can become more challenging than you initially anticipated." Mark's expression remained understanding, but his follow-up revealed the steel beneath his warm exterior. "That's a diplomatic way to put it, but let's be specific. In your engagement interview, you said you were thrilled to hit the ground running and serve the Commonwealth. You talked about how wonderful it was to have Harry's support. Were those feelings genuine, or were you already having doubts?" The directness of the question struck Meghan like an unexpected blow. Her voice carried a slight tremor as she responded. "Those feelings were absolutely genuine at the time. But as I've said, situations can become more complex as they develop." "Complex how?" Mark pressed, his Latino warmth making his persistence feel more like concern than aggression. "Because from the outside, it looked like you were given everything: platform, resources, global attention. What changed?" Kelly attempted to provide some cover for their guest. "Mark, maybe we should." "No, it's okay," Meghan interrupted, though her voice suggested it was anything but okay. "I'm happy to address these questions." But her body language told a different story. She had shifted in her chair, turning slightly away from Mark, and her breathing had become noticeably more shallow. Mark leaned back slightly, studying her with the same intensity he had once brought to dramatic scenes on daytime television. I ask because my wife and I have been in this business for a long time. We've seen a lot of people come and go, and we've learned to recognize when someone is playing a character versus being authentic. And I have to say, the person sitting here today feels very different from the person we saw in those early royal interviews. The observation hit Meghan like a physical slap. Her composure cracked visibly as she leaned forward defensively. I'm not playing a character, Mark. This is who I am. This is who I've always been. But that's just it, Mark replied, his voice carrying the same gentle intensity he had once used to convey complex emotions on television. The person in those early interviews seemed genuinely happy and grateful. The person here today seems angry and defensive. That's not evolution, that's transformation. What happened to change you so fundamentally? Meghan's eyes began to fill with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and frustration at being challenged so directly. What happened is that I learned the truth about how that institution really operates. I learned what it's like to have your voice silenced and your identity erased. Kelly tried again to redirect the conversation. Well, you're certainly not silenced now. You have this beautiful book, your Netflix projects. Exactly, Mark interrupted, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction at Kelly's inadvertent support for his point. You say you were silenced, but you have multiple platforms, lucrative deals, global reach. You say you wanted privacy, but you're here promoting another project. Don't you see the contradiction in that? Something inside Meghan began to unravel. Her voice rose just enough to be noticeable as she responded. There's no contradiction in taking control of your own narrative after years of having it controlled by others. Mark's expression remained sympathetic, but his words were devastating. But that's the problem, isn't it? Your narrative keeps changing. The timeline shifts, the details evolve, the level of alleged mistreatment increases with each telling. That's not taking control. That's rewriting history to serve your current needs. I am not rewriting anything. Meghan's voice cracked with emotion. Everything I've said has been my honest experience. But which honest experience? Mark asked with genuine curiosity. The one where you were grateful and excited to serve? Or the one where you were miserable and mistreated? Because both can't be equally true. The question hung in the air like a challenge that Meghan couldn't meet. Her breathing became labored, and tears began to stream down her cheeks as she struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't contradict her current narrative. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You don't know what it was like. Mark leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine compassion. You're right, I don't. But I do understand what it's like to be in the public eye, to have your every move scrutinized. And I also understand what it's like to be grateful for opportunities rather than resentful when they don't meet your exact expectations. The word struck Meghan like a series of body blows. She shot to her feet so violently that her chair rocked backward, her face flushed with rage and humiliation. How dare you, she shouted, her voice echoing through the studio. How dare you sit there and judge me when you have no idea what I've sacrificed? Mark remained seated, looking up at her with an expression of calm concern that somehow made her emotional breakdown appear even more dramatic. What exactly did you sacrifice, Meghan? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you gained far more than you lost. I lost everything, she screamed, tears now flowing freely. I lost my family, my identity, my sense of self. Kelly stood as well, clearly trying to defuse the situation. Meghan, please, let's all just take a breath. No. Meghan turned on Kelly with fury. I'm tired of being told to take a breath. I'm tired of being told to be calm while people attack my character and question my truth. Mark's voice remained steady and controlled. Nobody's attacking your character, Meghan. We're simply asking you to explain the inconsistencies in your own statements. If that feels like an attack, maybe you should ask yourself why. Meghan grabbed her purse from the floor beside her chair, her movements jerky and uncoordinated in her emotional state. This interview is over. I came here in good faith, and you've ambushed me with lies and accusations. The only lies here are the ones you've been telling, Mark replied with devastating calm. And deep down, I think you know that. As Meghan turned to flee, Mark delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire interview. Meghan, he called out, his voice carrying the warmth and authority that had made him a beloved television personality. In our community, we have a saying, La verdad no teme la luz, the truth doesn't fear the light. The fact that you're running away from basic questions tells us everything we need to know about your version of the truth. Meghan stopped dead in her tracks, her entire body trembling with barely contained fury. For a moment, it looked like she might turn around and physically confront him. Instead, she pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle what sounded like a sob and ran toward the exit. Her heels clicked frantically against the studio floor as she fled, the sound amplifying in the sudden silence that had fallen over the entire space. The cameras followed her until she disappeared through the stage door, leaving behind a quiet so complete that even the production crew seemed to have stopped their usual bustling. For several long moments, nobody moved. Mark sat calmly at the desk, his expression composed despite having just delivered one of the most devastating takedowns in morning television history. Kelly remained standing, clearly processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Finally, Kelly found her voice. "Well," she said, attempting to inject some lightness into the heavy atmosphere, "that was certainly not what we had planned." Mark turned to face the camera with the professionalism that had defined his career. "Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we don't plan to have," he said quietly. "Our audience deserves honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." "Absolutely," Kelly agreed, sitting back down and attempting to restore some normalcy to the situation. "When we come back, we'll be talking with our cooking expert about easy summer recipes." But everyone knew that nothing could follow what they had just witnessed. The rest of the show would be anticlimactic, a footnote to a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for months to come. As the show cut to commercial, Mark and Kelly sat in contemplative silence. They had both witnessed dramatic moments before, but this felt different. This felt like the complete exposure of a carefully constructed public persona in real time. "Do you think we went too far?" Kelly asked quietly. Mark shook his head slowly. Someone needed to ask those questions. If she couldn't handle them, that tells us more about the validity of her claims than any prepared statement ever could. The remainder of the show proceeded with Kelly and Mark discussing the interview and taking calls from viewers, but everyone knew that nothing could overshadow the dramatic confrontation they had just witnessed. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, and news outlets were beginning to cover the story. Meanwhile, somewhere in the ABC building, Meghan Markle was probably in a bathroom, trying to repair her makeup and compose herself enough to face the inevitable photographers waiting outside. Her minimal security team was likely coordinating an exit strategy while her publicist fielded frantic calls from concerned associates. But the damage was irreversible. In less than 20 minutes, one of American television's most beloved personalities had systematically exposed the contradictions in her carefully crafted narrative. He had done it with warmth and apparent compassion, which somehow made it even more devastating than outright hostility would have been. Whether you agreed with his methods or not, one thing was undeniable: Mark Consuelos had asked the questions that millions of viewers had been thinking but that no one else had dared to voice so directly. His refusal to accept manufactured victim narratives had created a moment of television that would be remembered and analyzed for years to come. The truth, as Mark had suggested in Spanish, indeed doesn't fear the light. And sometimes, the most effective way to expose manufactured narratives is simply to ask their creators to explain the inconsistencies in their own words while maintaining the warm, respectful tone that makes refusal to answer seem unreasonable. In those 20 minutes, American morning television had witnessed the complete deconstruction of a modern celebrity's attempt to control public perception through emotional manipulation and selective memory. The architect of that deconstruction had been a man who understood that compassion and accountability aren't mutually exclusive.